Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining for today's webinar, Metrics and Machines. My name is Sofia Fernandez, and I'm the Open Research Manager at University of Exeter, and also a member of LIBER Innovative Metrics Groups, and I'm hosting these sessions for you. Our speakers, we have Dr. Charlotte Wien, Professor of Scholarly Communication at University Library of Southern Denmark, and she will explain why metrics are such a hot topic. Gustav Nelhams, Senior Lecturer at the Swedish School of Library and Information Science, will look at the connections between metrics and text mining. So just a few notes before we start. Let me explain you how you can talk to us during the webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, just write them to the chat. We will have 10-15 minutes for times of questions and answers. And if you have any questions, just type them in the chat. You have the attendee chat at the left of your screen. You can use it. I will bring them up at the end, and our speakers will answer those questions. Just one last thing, we will have a recording of the webinar, and it will be available on the LIBER website and also on YouTube. So without any further delays, I will pass the word to Charlotte, please.
Well, thank you very much, Sophia. The topic given to me to work on by the LIBER members in the working group of innovative metrics is the ethics of alternative metrics. It took me a while to figure out why LIBER members found this topic important, but suddenly it became very clear. When trying to establish qualitative measures to measure research quality, quantitative measures to measure research quality, we are facing what philosophers call a contradictio in adjecto. It's conflicting conditions and it's logically fallacious. It is both naive and arrogant to think that mind-blowing new thoughts that has the potential of changing the world can be reduced to numbers in a spreadsheet. It resembles the situation where the television series Shogun was aired and the author of the novel, James Clavell, was asked if he liked it. His answer was, "Who the heck wants to see his cow boiled down into a stock cube?" One could argue that by using bibliometric measures to measure research quality and researcher performance, we are boiling down the complex and magical world of research into stock cubes. Faced with such a contradiction, both researchers and librarians constantly must ask themselves, what should I do? And if any of you have ever worked with ethical dilemmas, you know that whenever you feel an urge to ask the question, you are facing an ethical dilemma. Therefore, ethics and research metrics go hand in hand. It is probably also for this reason that metrics are subject of many heated debates in academia these years. The conflict stands between researchers on one hand, who want fair assessment, and decision makers on the other, who need simple means of establishing an overview over research and its sea of complexity. So far, no one-size-fits-all standard performance measure has been established. The methods and theories of various scientific disciplines, their differences in scope and aim, their publication traditions, and so on and so forth, has made it virtually impossible to establish metrics covering all discipline, providing justice to research, and at the same time establishing the overview so much in demand. But why is it in demand? What has brought us here? Why don't we just trust researchers to do what we pay them for? To understand that, we need to go back just in time, just for a short while. The student revolts in the late 1960s had introduced democracy as governing principles at the universities in many European countries. University leaders were elected among and by faculty and students. Democracy had many advantages, but swift decision-making was not one of them. Over the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, the universities had become inefficient, malfunctioning, anarchistic institutions populated by professors working more for themselves than for their institutions. There were no shared values and goals across the departments. Change was necessary, and it was coming. In 1991, the British social scientist Christopher Hood had named the new wave of reforms seeking to increase the efficiency of the public sector New Public Management. The hypothesis behind New Public Management is that the public sector institution can become effective if run like private sector companies. Competition and cost effectiveness are guiding principles. Under NPM, the allocation of resources is oriented away from principles like equity and social justice towards pursuit of greater efficiency. Efficiency has to be measured, which is why performance indicators must be established. Research and performance indicators like the H index serves this purpose. In Britain, NPM was introduced quite aggressively under Thatcher, Major and Blair. For this reason, UK does not provide an average case in this matter, and I will therefore continue my argument using Denmark as my case. The Danish universities, being notoriously anarchistic and resistant to management, were not hit by NPM before the mid-zeros. But by 2003, a new university law turned the universities into self-governing institutions with board of directors as top management. They would hire a vice-chancellor, who would hire the deans, who would hire the heads of departments, and so on. Student and faculty boards were only advisory. All major decisions should be taken by this new class of managers, who in return were supposed to document increased performance. Notice how the private sector management lingo is everywhere. Contracts, top management, board of directors, and so on and so forth. In his famous book, The Fifth Discipline, Peter Senge represents 11 laws of systemic thinking. The first one is, today's problems comes from yesterday's solutions. In the beginning, NPM seemed to make academia more efficient, but gave in secret birth to a twin monster. One is the para-academic industry, the second one is the mayhem of metrics. When academia aligned itself with the private sector, many of the obstacles that the private sector company had been facing in terms of penetrating the academic market diminished. Previously, academia had looked upon the corporate world with contempt, scorning it for, among other things, its business morals. But suddenly vice-chancellors and deans spoke the same language and invited the consultants from private sector inside to help building the new NPM structures. Out of these invitations grew a new industry whose commodity is different types of services to academia. The service can be targeted either at the researchers themselves, the university management, or both. They include publishing companies, social media for researchers, reference management software, database hosts, professional conference organizers, ranking bureaus, and data for various metrics and the metrics themselves. When I call the para-academic industry and the mayhem of metrics a twin monster, it is because they are both offspring of NPM and their existence is contingent upon each other. Before the mid-zeros, measuring research performance and research quality was nerdy business. However, when Hirsch suggested the H-index in 2005, the timing was perfect. Firstly, the NPM zeitgeist was craving for performance indicators. Secondly, one of the first para-academic companies had been collecting data for its calculation for more than 40 years. The linguist, librarian, chemist, and businessman Eugene Garfield had formed the Institute for Scientific Information, later Web of Science, in 1964. Despite its public sector sounding name, ISIS was a private company. Its commodity was scientific bibliography with cross-references to the cited literature. In the middle of the 90s, these biographies were digitalized and thus became a powerful tool for analyzing publication and citation rates. A new business selling both references to publications and data on publication activities had emerged. Elsevier Verlag launched their competing products Scopus and Cyvel in 2004, while Clarivate produced products are Web of Science for references and Insights for data. The para-academic industry had struck gold. They had relatively modest cost of production and distribution combined with loyal and in principle endless rich clientele who were highly dependent on their commodity, access to publication and data on publication activities. And we are talking big money. According to a recent article in The Guardian, the scientific arm of Elsevier Verlag reported a revenue of more than 2 billion euros in 2010 and a profit of 800 million euro, making the profit margin 36%, which is even better than Apple, Google, and Amazon. The flow of taxpayer money is unfortunately not the only damage that the mayhem of metrics are doing. It is also undermining the integrity of research and researchers. It probably lies deep within human nature that given a measure for one's performance, most of us will immediately start optimizing against it. However, optimizing in its nature is alarmingly close to questionable practices of research and therefore threatens to undermine the integrity of researchers. Social psychologists have shown that only about 40% of us are completely honest. The remaining 60% of us cheat if we can. What prevents individuals from cheating is fear of getting caught. Therefore, in areas where chances of getting caught are modest, the likelihood of dishonest behavior is high. Furthermore, dishonest behavior is more likely if we have reason to believe that we will gain from engaging in it. Of other important factors are external locus of control, meaning that if someone outside your organization performs quality assurance, then most of us are more inclined to cheat. It is quite evident that all of this applies very well to academic work. What makes it even more problematic is that the lines between what is dishonest behavior and just smart and rational optimizing of performance measures are blurred. Take the H-index based on publications and citations. Optimizing one's numbers of publication is simple. By sharing authorship, the same publication counts on two researchers' publication lists. Analyses of authorship patterns within health sciences have revealed that the average number of authors per paper have increased more than fivefold over the last 100 years, going from one author in 1913 to 5.4 authors per paper in 2013. Future projections of these figures suggest that in 2032, the average numbers of authors per paper will be 8. Media has also brought forward some quite grotesque examples. Recently, Nature reported on having identified 9,000 authors who claim to have authored more than 70 papers per year from 2000 to 2016. One of these hyper-prolific researchers has claimed 2,566 authorships in 16 years. Research in authorship patterns indicate that much of the increase in the average numbers of authors per journal article is the result of so-called gift authorships. The practice of awarding authorships to a colleague who has not contributed to the actual publication is becoming the normal practice in many disciplines. It is also normal to utilize the asymmetric power relation between PhD students and the supervisors for the supervisor to obtain co-authorship on the student's paper. A recent study carried out at SDU indicated that 22% of the health science PhD student had felt an unethical pressure to include other researchers as authors of their work within the last 12 months. Maximizing temptations can also be optimized effectively and sophisticatedly, but even equally unethical, questionable resource methods which are hard to detect. Establishing citation cartels is the new trend. If a researcher within a community share disproportionately more citations with each other than they do with other groups of researchers working on the same area, they may have established a citation cartel. They serve two purposes. The first is to help researchers maximize their citation. The second is to help editors improve their journal impact factor. For this reason, citation cartels are often established by the journal editors and not even by the researchers themselves. One informant from our recent studies on how researchers use optimizing strategies to improve their H-index informed us that he always offered the journal editor a co-authorship because he had discovered that articles where the editor was co-author received significantly more citations than other publications. Editors may also enter into partnerships with other editors, making the detection of citation cartels even more difficult. The Journal of Medical Science Monitor published a review with 490 references. 445 of these were to articles published in Cell Transplantation between 2008 and 2009. Furthermore, 4 authors were members of the editorial board of Cell Transplantation, which, by the way, had seen a phenomenal growth in its impact factor between 2006 and 2010. From this argument, it seems evident that the morals of researchers are under pressure. They are increasingly forced to spend precious time that could have been spent on research optimizing against the performance measures imposed on them. This has led to inflation in authorships and citations devaluating the traditional measures. To compensate for that, this para-academic industry willingly developed new measures. But returning to the point in the introduction that measuring research quality is contradictory in adjecto, new measures just lend more power to the merry-go-round of optimizing against any measures being imposed. Our university has put a new portal for our pure installation system into operation. The new portal displays both the PlumX flower and the altmetric donut. A research friend of mine brought up the topic over lunch with a visiting professor. Much to his surprise, the professor was very much aware of these researcher performance indicators and told him that she had been optimizing against them for several years. To do that, she had created a series of fake profiles on all relevant social media platforms, and whenever publishing, she would start tweeting and retweeting, posting and sharing with herself to make her altmetric score quite impressive. I was quite puzzled, so after publication of an article on predatory publishing in LIBER Quarterly, I sent out an email to my colleagues asking them to like and retweet a tweet containing the DOI of the article. In less than 24 hours, the article skyrocketed into the top 5% of all research output scored by altmetrics of the same age. Even though the retweeting campaign ended a year ago, our article is still among the top 5%, and it appears that it's being cited, quoted, and used all over the world. The article of predatory is an okay, solid, but scientifically average piece of work. It hardly deserves to be among the top 5% of attention-attracting research output. Despite these somewhat somber facts about state of the art in academia, I will conclude my presentation on an optimistic note. Returning to my point in the beginning, then NPM replaced an ineffective system. At the same time, it was believed that the public sector could be managed by the same means of the private sector. Today, we have so much evidence that this is not the case. One of the most crucial points of criticism against using NPM as managing principle in academia is its failure to create valid and generally trusted performance indicators. One could argue that researcher optimizing strategy contains an element of civil disobedience, making the uselessness of simplistic performance indicators of research evident. Other forces are pulling in the same direction. The open science movement put pressure on the business model of the para-academic industry, and last year Ghent University announced that they have designed a new evaluation policy where they, instead of publications and citations, assess faculty on collaboration, collegiality, and teamwork. The main idea is that academia should again belong to the academics rather than to the para-academic industry. According to Ghent's Vice-Chancellor Rick van der Walle, a predominantly quantitative and output-driven academic evaluation process makes way for talent development and growth, prioritizing vision development and strategy at the personal as well as at the group level. If so, then quality again prevails over quantity. In the coming years, we should study them carefully. We, and here I'm talking about the research libraries, should engage ourselves in the struggle for increased openness in science, since that seems to be the best weapon against the para-academic industry. We should speak against simplistic metrics that can be gamed, and we should do what we can to re-establish trust in academia. Thank you for your attention. Oh, and sorry, I should say, and Gustav, over to you.
Thanks a lot. That was a good piece of work here, and I'm very grateful to be here and talk in this webinar. And to a certain extent, I see it here as the citation has been made the villain in this story, and this. My thing here is to try to restore its honor in a way by looking at what can we do with the citations and citation data if we should not use them for evaluating researchers. So I concur totally with what you have said here, but I will try to move into another direction. Let's see if I can move the slides over here. Yeah. So the topic of this presentation here is machine learning and citation analysis. And I will talk about how we can use, combine these two topics or parts of research that is done, often in different research areas, and combine them into something that could be meaningful to try to use, especially for, not for evaluating research maybe, but rather for getting to know a new research area, or to get an overview and categorize and try to study what is actually done and how it is done. I should also say that I come from, this is work that has been done in a project, an EU project that is called Data for Impact, that finished quite recently, where the topic was to help EU specifically, but also other funders, to get to know what kind of research, which research that they have funded that has had impact or been used in different contexts in society. So rather than evaluating research in research, we were looking at societal impact, but not using traditional just simple metrics, but rather to try to understand a little bit of the content. And some of the results that we came up with there is used further on in future research that we are working on. So machine learning and linked data I've already talked about, data for impact, and we now work more as a consultant, helping people that are interested in using bibliometrics in various ways, where text analysis is part of the work. And some of this I will talk about a little bit later. I will come back to the other things. I should also note, and following on Charlotte's presentation here, the citation debate is something that has never really ended, and it started quite early. So already when Eugene Garfield presented the Science Citation Index as a concept, and especially when it started to be used in the 1960s, people questioned, is it actually quality we measure, or is it something else? So the debate has been, is citation a measure of quality, or showing that you have been influenced by others, or could it also be seen as a work of rhetorics or persuasion, where you try to persuade researchers to use the same kind of sources that you have chosen? And the argument against quality is, of course, that you can cite for many different reasons, not just for that you build on earlier research or as credit or reward, but rather in many different ways. And a lot of this is lost if you only count the number of citations. So in the work that I'm working on and the research that I've been doing, I talk about the use of citations as a performative agent in a way. Instead of just seeing citations as reward, researchers are using references for, as Charlotte already told here, but in quite negative terms. But I would say that they could be used both in positive and negative terms to position one's own work, shows which sources that you use, but also then, of course, showing which sources you don't use. So the performativity of being cited is a way to talk about how researchers actually respond to these incentives that come from many different ways, both from policy but also within research, where of course being cited is important to be to show that you have used the correct research and that you are passing on the traded goods, so to speak, and that can be seen here in citations. So it's a combination. But researchers are of course reflexive, and it would be very interesting to understand how they use references, not so therefore the qualitative aspect of citing is what is very much in focus here. This is something that was known already to Eugene Garfield. So his view was not only that citations were used as an evaluative measure, rather he was quite hesitant, and he said that citation data should never be used for evaluating research, and especially not when selecting personnel. He already wrote about this in the early 1960s. And his view on the citation was that it is a much more broader concept. So he talked about the citation, as we see here in this slide, as a symbolic representation of a subject. So instead of having people reading articles and putting keywords on them and saying what they are about, in a way, the citation is a manifestation that there is a link between two documents, and the citation then becomes this symbolic representation of something. This something, of course, needs to be interpreted by a human being. But by looking at which research is citing which, we could also, in a way, see that they are topically related to each other. So this view was already presented in a quite interesting infomercial that is available on YouTube from 1967, where Eugene Garfield talks about this. And later, one of the main researchers at the ISI, the company that Eugene Garfield started, Henry Small, who is also a well-renowned researcher, he talked about cited documents as concept symbols, and expanded this idea quite a lot. So on the one hand, we work with citation networks. We look at who is citing who, and these are some very old ways of showing this. Actually, the one on the right, Garfield's 1971 example, is used to this day in his software HistCite, but also in CiteNet Explorer. It's the same idea here, that we can look at articles that cite each other, and the link is, of course, a reference, and each node is an article here. And by looking at this, we can follow and this is a time scale also from the top to the bottom, so we can follow who is citing who. But as I said before, we are also interested in the textual contents. We are interested in looking at why researchers are citing some other research. So we work with a theoretical conceptualization here, that a link and the actual reference, the content that we cite, is what we call showing a knowledge potential, not just information, but the reference can contain different kinds of subjects, so to speak, and by doing this match, we some of these knowledge potentials are been set in motion, so to speak, are used. And we are discussing it in this way, following the theoretical conceptualizations here by Birger Jørland, information science researcher in Copenhagen. So we are trying to go from a machine-based understanding of text, which is a subject in itself and a topic in itself in linguistics, to combining this with citation data and see what can we do when we not just look at the instances of simple citations, but also looking at the text surrounding a reference, trying to understand why is this article cited, or what is it cited for. But we use it at the machine learning level, which means that we are not interested in single instances of references and the text around it, but rather the full set of discussions that have been made around specific references. So we work with what we call a research program, which is where we use references as they are words. So if you have a string of words with a reference somewhere in the middle, we treat this reference as one of these words, meaning that we get we blur the distinction, so to speak, between the linked object and the actual textual content of the text. We'll come back to this in a moment. I want to say yes something about this project, because this project, I already talked about it a little bit. It was about looking at what research has an impact in society, but also in policy. What research activities actually have an impact, so to speak. And we did this using data from EU, specifically from FP7 and Horizon 2020, data, meaning that we had application data, we had the publications that were published during these projects that we monitor, and also the final project report from these projects. Using this very heterogeneous set of data, we tried to create in this project a topic model, a model of all the text that was used, and then trying to identify which themes were active in different areas and over time and so on. So that was part of this. In a way, what we needed to do then was to identify actors in these networks that we were working on also. So of course there's a link between an article and an author, but authors also are related in other ways. So looking at a knowledge graph, which could be presented in this way here, we have in the middle one researcher, and we can get data from different sources and combine them to get a richer data set. So combining this researcher with the data up to the left, we get information about that this researcher has been a PI in a project. She has an ORCID, and that can then be used to link to, for example, publications. We find publications in OpenAir, but also in Crossref, and they are combined here in this set. We can identify information in Wikidata about researchers, for example, having won an award or something like that is found in Wikidata. And we also can match it to a certain degree to news articles in European media monitors. We can get much more information to combine here. These data were used in different ways to, in the end, produce metric data which looked at links between researchers, what kind of research does get or show an impact, and which research is found in different parts of the big data set that we were working on. And these are the kinds of material that we worked with. In the end, and this is just part of what I will talk about in a minute, but in the end we created then a topic model, meaning that we created a model that identify words as tokens that are related to each other. So if two words often occur together, they are in a way grouped together, like co-word analysis, but using a slightly different way of working with this material, it's possible to create a model where you can identify specific themes that are discussed. And by having an expert and naming these topics, we can look at the impact of the research in each of these topics in various ways. So here, in a way, this is the traditional way of showing this. This is an illustration from Wikipedia showing that in this document there are a certain amount of topics, so to speak, that are often found together when you are looking at not just one document at a time, but rather millions of documents at a time. And the algorithm then identifies different topics. In this way, in this case, these 4 topics here: the yellow, red, green, and turquoise, and can say something about this part of work is related to this kind of topic. In the project, then, what we did was, for example, we did this temporal map where each of the colors here is a representation of a topic over time. So we have a time scale from 2004 to, I don't remember exactly where it went, to 2018 or 17 maybe. And we can then, in a way, follow by looking at the research that we monitored over time, looking at what topics are more prominent or shown at different stages of this time scale. So in a way, we could show in which topics that are quite safe bets, or they don't change very much. They are used a lot, both in the beginning, middle, and the end, while other topics are more emerging topics that come up and become more prominent within. Some that might are being going down, or rather maybe are hibernating. It doesn't say that they are this is bad research, but rather that these are things that are not focused at the moment, but they can of course come back in again. Let's see. So this was what we did in the project, but some of the research that we also did in this project that we are working on further on now is to look at specifically, as I talked about before, looking at the relation of references to text and see if we can use that in a meaningful way to, for example, identify which research is expected to be cited when you talk about a specific topic. Or in the other way around, if you have a specific topic, or rather, if you have a specific citation, in what context has this document or this reference been cited within the data set that we are working with here? So we, as we say here, I will actually come back to this in a moment. Another version of this slide. So I jump a little bit ahead, because what we did here was that we worked not with topic modeling, but with another kind of machine learning algorithm, which is called word embedding, which in a way it works in the same way that we relate terms to each other by the relationship they have within text, but in a somewhat different way, which means that we can create a topic space or a word space that we can use then traditional mathematics actually to for example, if we find a set of words like king, man, and regent, and then we say take out man and instead put in woman, and the algorithm would then show the word queen, as this is a regent of a non-man sort, so to speak. So in a way, it is possible to use these algorithms in a way to relate research to each other based on the company it has, so to speak. So instead of actually looking at the words, we also look at the words around it, and the more alike the words around it are, the more like these words also become in themselves. So for this, we used part of the data set that I talked about before. So we took from 2 million articles from PubMed. We extracted the actual content of the text, and then chose specifically the words around each reference that we identified. So we identified 7 million references in these articles, and then took 20 words before and 20 words after this specific reference to analyze in what way was this reference cited, so to speak. So to show it in a more meaningful way here, we can see, and we can look at the top part of this, looking at, we have the IDs from PubMed. These are the PubMed IDs of the citing article and the cited article. Then we have 20 words, and again the cited articles with PubMed ID is found there, and then 20 words again. We also have some other information that we stored about the year and publication type. But then treating these 41 words in a way that we got when we used the reference as one of these words, we can create what is called a vector space where we can identify how this specific reference has been cited by other work. So that we can try to categorize the research. And the easiest way to show this is by showing this slide. And okay, I had hoped that the articles would not come up directly. So what we see here is, if we don't take the articles that are found on top here, we see a couple of different topics. And what we did here was that we asked the model, can you show us, or of course we didn't ask it in a personal way, but we programmatically asked it, show us 1,000 words related to terrorism in this database that we created of 7 million references within PubMed. So these are medical researchers, and what kind of research is published where terrorism is a concept that is used, one could say. And if we look at the green part down to the left, we have areas that are more within psychology. We have the yellow ones, which are slightly covered now, but about violence and legal issues, police and crimes and so on. We have crashes and motorcycles on the top. The purple slightly to the right here is about infrastructure, buildings, airports, and so on. And at the bottom we have issues which relates to war and crisis in different ways, but also natural catastrophes as earthquakes. And also all the way out to the right we have issues regarding to biomedical issues on bioterrorism in a way. So then but what we also see here in this slide is that we have numbers, and these numbers are the PubMed IDs that I talked about before. So what we can do now is to show that or ask what words are often used when this specific reference is cited in the material. And if we go start from the top right, for example, we have an ID that ends with 43, and the topic of this paper is about bicycle commuter safety rates, and it sits quite squarely in the topic of in this case, of course, motorcycle, but crashes and accidents and things like that. It's quite topical, one could say. Down to the right, we have an article ending with 83. Which sits very close to Iraq war and other terms which are more into war issues, so to speak. And it is an article that is called Mental Health, Social Function and Disability in Post-War Afghanistan Soldiers. So this is about PTSD in a way. So when this article has been cited, words like Iraq war and Afghanistan has often been used. Down to the left, we have, you have conspiracist ideation in Britain, and it's in the psychological cluster and very close to the word grandiose. So apparently the word grandiose has been used very closely to the reference to this specific article. And maybe the most prominent example here is the article about cyberbullying, which is shown up to the top left, which sits squarely between the words bullying and cyberbullying. And both of these terms are actually in the actual paper here. But this is just to show that this model is quite good at identifying articles. So we made it able to identify articles that are used when you cite, when you talk about a specific topic. So these articles are cited often when these words are used. And finally, I just want to show, and again, this should have been an animated version here, where we can also do this, because before we did it on the full data set, so we didn't have time included here. But in this slide, we have the vector space model. This time we asked it to show words about vaccine, and then we take the word vaccine for each of these years. So when it was cited in 2008, it's a little bit down to the right, slightly below the word currently. And then in 2009, it was closely to the word drugs, and so on. So in a way, we can follow the topical emergence or the vector space emergence here of a term over time, so that we can follow changes that happen. And of course, using it on a yearly basis makes a bit rough data, so it would be better to cluster it in different ways. But this is just to show one way of using this model, so to speak. And the idea here is, of course, that instead of looking at citation data generally as we do in citation index, we look at how it has been cited, which words were used when a specific source was cited in a document, and thereby creating rather a science reference index rather than a science citation index. So we focus on another position. And here, this is something that is possible to do because of open science and open access, of course, because we need to do these models on the full set of data or full set of text in a document, rather than just noting that there is a reference, but we need to understand or look at the way it has been cited. So, and just to conceptions that have been discussed here, we have a quote again from Jölan's articles that subjects, in a way, this is just a switch of the argument that I made before, subjects in themselves could be defined, as we say here, the potential of documents. And the potential of documents here is the way that these reference contexts are manifested in this vector space model. So in a way, we identify subjects of articles by how they have been used rather than what they say that they do. So even if an article say that it is about vaccine, if it hasn't been cited in relation to other terms that relate to vaccination issues, it will not be found as an article about vaccines. So this model can also be used in a way to classify documents. Yeah, these are some references to the work that we are working on right now, where we are using these methodologies in different ways. I just wanted to show them here. So, yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte and Gustav, for such an interesting presentation. We will go ahead now and take some time for questions. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions in the chat. It looks like we already have a few. So I have Manuela that asks a very naive, I'm going to quote, a very naive question to Gustav. Is the word embedding done in XML or RDF? Since it all looks like linked data graphs, I would assume it's RDF. However, the whole process sometimes reminds me of T encoding, TEE encoding work on large text corpora, so I'm slightly confused. Thank you, and apologies for the probably very stupid sounding question. I'm sure it isn't, but Gustav will answer.
Exactly, it's not stupid at all, or naive. It's a very insightful comment and question. Actually, it's based on the XML data that we work with the XML data from the publications that we find in PubMed. So they are encoded in XML, and then the actual word embedding is done then based on identifying a reference in the text, and then treating it, putting the ID of the reference into the text, and taking away everything else. So it is actually XML data. So maybe you could ask or make a follow-up question, but this is done automatically, so to speak. So this is not us manually encoding the data, but an algorithm that that creates this the vector space model based on the words that it uses, and in this case 40 words around one reference, meaning that we use 41 words in that we put into the model that is doing the analysis.
Thank you, Gustav. So we have another question. So have you tested on other disciplines than medicine? Any difference in patterns or results?
Yes, thank you, Charlotte. Well, in this project, it was medical research that we were working on, and finding open access data at a level that it is meaningful to do this analysis means that we are restricted to the available sources that we have. And PubMed, and in this case, EuroPubMed Central, provides the possibility with the XML files, making it possible to actually identify references very simply, so to speak, just working with the data that is at hand without any interpretation or ways of trying to identify a reference into a specific ID. So therefore, we haven't done this work with reference data in other fields yet, but we have used it on completely different sets of data, namely in an encyclopedia, a Swedish encyclopedia, the Nordic Family Book it's called. It's an encyclopedia from the late 1800s and early 1900s, and this we have used it in a similar way to be able to search for terms that are found closely to the specific topic that we are interested in. So, for example, when we were interested again in the word terrorism, the word terrorism was not meaningfully described or it wasn't used in the same way as it is used now in the 1800s. But when we search for example, Russian anarchists, we would identify words that are common to the word terrorism, and therefore linking Russian anarchists to terrorism by the company of the words that the search word uses. So it can be used on completely different materials. So we are exploring what we can do, but we need rather big full text data sets to be able to do these kinds of analysis.
So Peter asks, are there any papers published within this project? Is the source code available?
Yeah. The publications, there are some publications showing this method, and there are some conference presentations that we have done, for example, at the Nordic workshop of bibliometrics last year in Reykjavik, but also at the ISSI conference in Rome, where we use different kinds, not specifically these data, but other data to talk about this. The source code will be available when we have published a real publication on this method. Right now, it's still work in progress, so to speak, and the code is not found in a very useful state. It's a lot of subcodes and subroutines that we work on. So it will be able in the future, yes.
I have a question from Anna that asks, how can research libraries engage with new academic assessment models?
Who's the question for? For both of us, or Sophia? Sophia, who's the question for?
Sorry, I was unmuted without knowing. So the question is for you. It's for you.
All right, could you please repeat it then?
Yeah. So how do you think research libraries can engage with new academic assessment models?
I'm not sure we can. I mean, we can engage in developing them like we do now, and I think what we can do is also we can find the current models. We can show the current models fallacies and the problems and caveats that there are in what we're doing currently. We can use our data to show university management that this is not a fair or that most of the bibliometrics done is not a fair measure for all kinds of research. And I think we should engage in that, and we should be very much aware of what we do in terms of performing bibliometric analyses. So that I think is the most important for us to do at the moment.
Can I add something here also? Because I think that it is important, as Charlotte says, that we need to show how we need to be cautious in using these very simple measures like citation counting in a way, maybe not even doing field normalization or other kinds of normalization between different research areas and age of documents and so on. And to show that we need to be very careful when they are used, because we can show that if we use them to evaluate researchers, it shows quite clearly that some researchers are extremely prolific and very come very high up in the scale, so to speak, while a lot of research that we see as promising and that will be very useful in the future, we can expect that at least, it hasn't received, for example, any citations yet, and then would be put down a little bit. So it's important to show the limits of what we can do with these numbers, so to speak. And what I do then is to show that we can use them in other ways. For example, more looking at using them for information and showing what research is available and how it is presented and cited, rather than that it is cited. I also talked to the vice chancellor at my university 2 days ago. Very prolific and have got a lot of impact. They are the ones that also, of course, will come out as successful, while small research groups and in specific research areas, you will not find these, they will not be found. So it's quite problematic in using them then. So yeah, I agree totally with all what Charlotte has said here.
And I'd like to add also that another thing we can do is we can speak out about this. We can make the public, as well as the university management and researchers themselves, aware of the differences that there are across different disciplines, and also the problems related to using traditional bibliometric measures.
Thank you, Charlotte and Gustav. It looks like we have covered all of our questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to add, Charlotte and Gustav?
No, just thank you to everybody for joining in. I hope you had a pleasant time. I hope you enjoyed the speaks. I think both Gustav and I enjoyed a lot speaking to you. So thank you very much.
Yes, thanks a lot.
So great. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time. Thank you.